This video will briefly introduce Project 3, which is to create a recipe book cover. Like I said before, we're working on this final big project in phases. So this third phase is to create a cover for a recipe book. The recipe book is going to be 12 pages. You've already designed icons, you've thought about how to organize a table as far as with the recipe cards, and now you're going to create the front and back cover. These are just examples of some student work that's been done in the past, not at Youngstown State, so it's a little bit of a different project. So you're not going to see all the requirements in these two examples, but this just kind of gives you an idea of some possibilities and perhaps some inspiration. The theme is Thanksgiving. So as you start to research for images and inspiration, keep this in mind as you start collecting your inspiration. In this case, the person has used some fall leaves, different images for the cover, your little, some cooking tools, that type of thing. But I'm going to go through, and you should also just start looking at some cookbooks. Go to the bookstore, look at their cookbooks. You could potentially look online to see different cookbook covers just for some inspiration. So you will be setting up your size. You don't want to go any smaller than 8 inches by 10 inches, but you don't want to go any bigger than 9 inches by 12 inches. You could also think about doing this portrait or landscape. Again, if you go landscape, I probably wouldn't do 12 inches wide, but I think, 11 inches wide might be okay. But just think about what format you would want your cookbook to be in, after referencing some other cookbooks that you've seen in the past. We're going back here. And remember, when you design a front and back cover, the back cover is on the left-hand side and the front cover is on the right-hand side. You must include the title of the recipe book, a short subtitle, and your name as the author. I'm not going to tell you what this title is. This is sort of where you're going to start in this program, kind of writing your own content, coming up with your concept. So it could just be Thanksgiving recipes, or you could think of something unique and clever that kind of fits the time. The back cover, you should have a short statement about the recipes. So a collection of recipes that could make your Thanksgiving fun, or a collection of recipes to celebrate America's favorite holiday, or however you want to say it. It doesn't have to be a paragraph necessarily, but maybe 1 or 2 sentences. You want to have an author's headshot, so that would be you, and this should be, a professional looking headshot. If you didn't want to use yourself, you could always just find, a random person, I guess, online, or, maybe take a picture of your mom or your sister or your brother, or you could, find some, a current author, and maybe it's Edgar Allan Poe. I have no idea, but you need to have an author's headshot, a short bio. So if this is, I would like it to be you. So think about how you could pretend what you could pretend your bio would be if you were, a famous chef. And then you will find a barcode and then do a copyright line at the bottom of the page. And that could just be, Thanksgiving cookbook, copyright 2025, and your name. It just has to be that simple. Some of the requirements. So you will be creating your imagery for this in Photoshop. So if you do, if you make a collage, or you definitely want to have, more than just one image. So you could do a Photoshop file that has a couple different images collaged together. And I kind of want to keep you using, I know you learned all this stuff in raster, but I want to keep you using Photoshop in practice for projects that are going to come up in the future. So you should have at least 3 images, and these 3 images don't have to be all in one file. So you could have 2 images on the cover, 3 images on the back. You could have 3 images on the cover and just 1 image on the back. But I will, want to make sure to, look through your Photoshop files and make sure that you're sort of meeting all these requirements. I want you to use at least 1 blending mode, 1 layer mask, so something that you have outlined or created a layer mask for, And you want to make sure in your Photoshop file that you account for the bleed. So if your booklet you've decided is 8 by 10, your Photoshop file should be set up with that, 0.125 inch bleed in mind. So in that case, it would be, excuse me, 8.25 by 10.25, and that kind of accounts for that extra 0.125 or eighth of an inch around. And then in the InDesign file, you'll place your Photoshop files into your InDesign files. And remember, your Photoshop files can be PSD files. You can place your layered Photoshop files in InDesign. Your InDesign file should be set up at the same size as Photoshop in spreads. All the text should be placed in InDesign. Unless your title needs some fancy Photoshop effects, you'll kind of want to explain that to me. But this way you can kind of freely move around all the elements as you make revisions and changes and all that kind of stuff. In the end, you'll package your InDesign file. I'll have access to your layered Photoshop files, your InDesign files, all that kind of stuff, and then a PDF. So that is basically the overview of this project. I will post a separate YouTube tutorial just with a little bit more information on setting up your files, setting it up in spreads, how you can set up a single file that has multiple spreads to kind of experiment with different designs so that you're not uploading, a bunch of separate PDFs, but they're all in one file. And then this also gives you an opportunity to reach out to me if you have any questions before you get started. As always, we're going to start with sketches. And then, create your digital files and go from there. But this is just meant to be sort of a brief overview, and then gives you a chance to kind of start thinking about the project and maybe collecting some inspiration for it.